Hey, it's Drybear. We just finished theory crafting a bunch of leveling builds for the witch, testing most of her mechanics, all the different areas of her kit and her talent tree. So what I wanted to talk about today, as we've been doing with our previous classes, is just do a review overall of the witch, where she sits right now, problems, benefits, tips, and tricks, and just congeal all that into one video. Now, to begin, I want to shout this in the rooftops as much as possible to get the message out there, and everyone needs to be screaming about this, because this is, in my opinion, kind of unforgivable that it functions this way. So a brief review on minions overall and how it functions, and something that hopefully is very easy for them to fix to make the game a lot better. There are multiple types of minions. There are temporary minions that have a duration on them. When the duration is up, they will go away, or if they die, they will perish and not come back. There are also permanent minions that will, just like other permanent effects like auras or heralds, reserve spirit and are permanent, which means that when they die, they will revive. This is a special name. It has its own nomenclature. They are reviving minions, and after a short delay, they will revive and come back without you having to re-summon them. They implemented this system to make it cleaner, so you wouldn't have to constantly cast Ray's skeleton over and over and over until your finger got tired. But there's a major flaw with this system that needs attention and needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because it is very unfortunate the way it is implemented. So let's look at the way this works. If a reviving minion dies, so if I sacrifice a minion, I start a reforming minions timer. At the end of this reforming minions timer, any minions that haven't respawned yet will respawn. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? So this timer starts as soon as you have less than your current allotted amount of permanent minions. The timer finishes, it will revive the minions that are there. However, there's two main problems with this system as it's implemented right now. The first is that the timer itself does not respect the number of minions that are dead when it started. So, for example, if I have two minions here and I sacrifice one, if I were to sacrifice another minion before this timer ends or a minion dies, the timer will reset. So you see how the timer just reset back to 8? Now I didn't get my first minion back. Now I have no minions. So every single time a reviving minion dies, it will reset the timer without giving you the minion that you were waiting for before, which becomes exponentially more challenging when you have 5, 8, 15 minions and they start staggering their deaths. One minion dies, starts the timer, another minion dies, resets the timer, resets, 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 and you can go for long stretches of time without getting a new minion, and it makes the whole system feel really bad. Now, you can modify this. There are options in the skill tree, like being able to reduce the timer. So minions revive faster here, there's minions revive faster here, and there's minions revive faster here. There's 5 nodes in total, which takes the timer from 8 seconds down to like 4.5 seconds, which is really good. And it means that you then have less likelihood of that happening. And realistically, it's not a time since last, it's not like your time until your minion comes back. It is a length of time in which no reviving minions can die. You need a permanent length of time where in that time window, no reviving minions have died, then you'll get your minions back. And that is just a very unfortunate system that means that you constantly have to pay attention to which minions have died and when. You have to back up, wait for the timer to end so you get your minions back. The whole thing is super freaky. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that there is a double penalty on a core mechanic in the witch kit. So if you come here and you look at the offering system, there are 3 offerings in the game: pain offering, bone offering, and soul offering. These allow you to sacrifice one of your permanent minions, a skeleton, and when you do so, they become a totem, a buff tower. They buff the other minions. You kill the minion, but every other minion gets some kind of benefit based on whichever offering you're looking at, which can be super powerful. Depending on the level of the gem, you can actually get like a damage absorption for them. You can increase their attack speed and cast speed and bonus damage. They can even buff you up and make you stronger. Super powerful. However, again, another issue with the timer system is when we have these minions, if I sacrifice a minion, see that the timer starts. If this offering ends before then, the timer will reset on its own. So it's actually, you pay a double penalty for these depending on how long the timer is. So if you start getting like really short timers, you'll actually start the offering timer when it starts, and then when the offering ends, if the timer is at a certain length, it will then reset and reset and start the timer over again, even though you just paid it for the offering. So you pay it twice on some offerings. So it gets super weird on that front. So how would you fix this? This is an issue of rolling timers. And this is something that is very common in MMOs, RPGs, turn-based games. And there are, half a dozen ways to solve this kind of problem. And it really depends on what GGG is both capable of doing based on their setup and their engine and everything, and B, want to do based on the system. You could do a wave-based timer, which some games do. In this case, you would just set that there is a hard wave timer that doesn't get interrupted and goes off every time, and however many minions are dead at that time when the wave ends, they all respawn together and they go in. You probably know this from team deathmatch games or FPS games or multiplayer games. There's a wave-based timer that's a fixed timer. It rolls, and when it hits the time end, whatever's available, it respawns them all, and it's done. And if you miss the timer, you just get on the next bus when it leaves the station, that sort of thing. So that's one solution. They could also do individual timers per minion. So when a minion dies, it starts a self-timer since the last time it died. And then when you have that time on the revive, based on your length of time, every minion has its own timer, which means that it takes exactly this amount of time for your minions to come back. There are pros and cons to any system implementation they do. I think there could be, a positive side to any one of those. The wave-based timer is great because you get them in chunks rather than staggering them. You can make an argument that getting them staggered is just going to increase the likelihood that they die again because minions are better in mass usually. You could do the individual timers, which means that you get them back on average faster because they don't have to wait for the next wave. If they miss a wave, they don't have to wait for that time. Either way, it just needs to be addressed because I don't think this is a good experience for players where they have to constantly pay attention to which minions are dying and which ones aren't. And based on the fact that we have corpse explosion, we have offerings that sacrifice minions, you can detonate minions with arsonists, you're constantly gaining and losing minions. And for the timer to reset like this, it to me is kind of unacceptable. So /end rant, I just want to make sure I put that out there again. I've mentioned it in my minion guides, but I want to mention it again in case everyone's looking at this for the first time or in the chance that this gets spread to GGG because I think it needs to be addressed. In general, I think that the Minion AI and functionality is quite good. There are definitely a lot of major problems that hopefully can just get targeted fixes. There's issues where if you enter into a boss arena that locks behind you, there are plenty of situations where the minions will get locked out and you're just in the boss room by yourself, like twiddling your thumbs. It's like when you're at the grocery store getting something at the cash register and your mom says, "I'll be right back." Keep them busy and you're just standing there and the cash register's like, "Hey, can you check out?" And there's nothing you can do and you're like, "I don't know, dude. My minions are outside. Can we wait?" And it's just super weird. So hopefully they find ways to just, maybe if they lock a room or they lock an encounter, the minions will just auto teleport to you initially. A lot of these things can be very easily fixed. There's also some map areas where the gate size is about the size of a player character. A lot of these are in like Act 2, for example, or even in the like Vol area at the end of Act 3. You try to walk through, you get through, and then your minions don't. They just stand there and they wait. And the weird part is that if you get too far away from your minions, in some cases, it will teleport to you alive. But also in some cases, if you get too far away from your minions, the game will just kill them, start the revive timer, and then you have to wait for them to revive, and then you get them back, which again kind of redoubles down on that situation where you desperately need the revive timer to be as short as possible because everything is so contingent on that timer working. So I think that there's definitely some targeted fixes they could do, but in general, I think the minions are rather smart. They do move pretty well. Aside from doorways in some of the map areas, they do path and navigate properly in most cases, better than most games that you'll get with minions. And they also have the added fact that you can control your minions in general, which is a nice improvement. Like you can command them to do things, which is really cool. And anyone that's playing Wish, I would highly recommend rebinding this key. On PC, it's default to tilde. I rebound mine to mouse 4, so like the thumb button on my mouse. This is super crucial because there will be a lot of cases in boss fights where, there's a big AoE or a telegraphed attack that's coming, and it's coming, and it can save you a lot of minions if you like direct them away from the danger so they don't die, and then you can tell them to attack, or you can have them focus fire a single target. If there's a rare that needs to go down or a boss or ads or something, you can tell them to go towards that target, attack that target. And having this in general will help circumvent pathing and navigation issues that the minions have, aside from the major issue right now where they just generally get stuck on things or get left out of areas when you get locked in. Now, the next thing I'll say about minions, and it might be an unpopular take, and I understand why they would not want to do this based on just the game itself, but personally, after playing a bunch of Witch, I would actually like to have an autocast feature for the minion command skills. There's definitely a conversation to be had around minions being too automated and you just being able to AFK and do nothing, or do minions do everything. But honestly, I think it's one of those arguments where, you know, what's more important, the philosophy of it or the feel of it? And when you're running a full minion build and you have command Ice Bomb and command Gas Grenade and command Enrage and all of these things, and you're trying to also work in debuffs and curses and offerings and other things while also moving around and positioning and using unique effects that trigger in the right area, there are definitely times where I just, after a while, I was like, I kind of wish that I could set some of my minions to auto cast their ability, even if it chews up my mana, even if it chews up my life, depending on my build. I don't care. I just want, you know, one less thing to have to do while playing. So I just want to put it out there. I don't know if people agree with me or not on that one. And I can totally see why GGG would not want to do, you know, auto cast on the skills for the minions. But ultimately, I think after 100 hours, 200 hours, 300 hours, it gets to the point where you kind of just want to ease that burden a little bit, and I think it would make minion builds more fun if you could like choose whether to cast it yourself or turn on an auto cast feature where they would just cast it when they can, no matter what. So that's the minion rant. Let's get that out of the way. That one's done. Let's talk a little bit about the overall vibe of the Witch. I was definitely worried going from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2 when we realized that the Elementalist, which is now the Sorceress, a brand new class in Path of Exile 2, when that was going away, right? Because there were a lot of things about the Witch that I loved playing. Like I liked playing Shock Witch, having Elemental Witch and different things in Path of Exile 1, and losing that was kind of a concern, and it felt like you were losing a big part of the Witch identity. But overall, I think it's actually in a very good state. I think the chaos damage across the entire game probably needs a bit of a buff. It does feel like they were afraid of chaos damage being too good, and so they intentionally put a lot of limiters and safety checks in. If you play like Acolyte of Chayula, or you play the any Witch that used chaos damage, and also just the separation of like chaos nodes here, chaos nodes here, they're very scattered like the Dragon Balls. They're all over the place. There's a lot of limiters on how much you can get, how the chaos is applied, and how it scales, which to me feels like it might be a little too overly cautious with the setup there. But I do think that in general, the Chaos Witch is super fun. I love being able to resurrect like contagion, like corpses on the ground. I like the fact that we can add curses, modify curses. We can use blasphemy to create some really cool options to apply curses in an area. We can detonate curses with Hex Blast, which is super fun. There's a lot of cool things you could do with chaos and curses and all of that. And I think it fits the overall vibe. And you can also run curses with both Infernalist or Blood Mage. And I'm very curious to see what they decide to do with the third Ascendancy. If it's not going to be Necromancer, are they going to go more with like, I mean, they have Blood and Bleed and they have Fire and Minions. Is it going to be more of like Bone, or is it going to be more chaos? Like, what are they going to do with the third Ascendancy that brings it all together? Because they have said that they don't want one of the Ascendancies to be the Minion Ascendancy. They want you to be able to use minions with all three of them. So if it's not going to be a minion-focused Ascendancy, what are they going to do with it, and what's going to scale with it overall? In general, I like where Bone is overall. The only challenge that I see with Bone is that I think game-wide, Bleeds probably need a bit of a buff. Like, all of the classes that do run Bleeds, I feel like Bleeds are just a little bit below the bar in how they scale and how they're applied. They are physical damage, they are an ailment, and they all are triggered just like the other ailments, right? So the magnitude of Ignite affects the Ignite that applies to the target, and also the size of damage of the physical hit that applies the Bleed affects the magnitude of the Bleed as well. It just feels like you can get much bigger dots from the elemental ailments or the chaos ailments or poison ailments than you can with Bleed in general, and I think there's a ton of synergy between Bleed and also physical spells like all of the Bone skills. And you can even get things like that inside of the Blood Mage tree, so Bleed, crit, bone, all of that put together. I think there's enough mechanics to really fit that into one piece. Next, I want to talk a little bit about corpses. This is something that again, it feels like they're being very cautious on, and it's probably the right approach as they go into early access and figure out what they want to do. But I feel like there could be an avenue for playing around with more corpse generation. There's also not that much corpse usage in the skill tree. Like there's stuff up here where you can, you know, not consume a corpse. You can get bonus damage from things like that. Because as you push to end game and start including uniques, things that can destroy corpses, detonate corpses, consume corpses, and get bonuses off of corpses, on top of the fact that you have plenty of ways to consume corpses to summon things, right? You have like the zombies, which you can scale up, unearth, which you can scale up. There's other things you could do to cause explosions, and also playing in parties with people too that may also be consuming corpses. Like try playing a like unearth zombie build in a party with someone that has the corpse walkers, the unique boots that blow corpses up as you walk around. Makes things super weird and awkward. And I think that this is solved a little bit in different ways for other systems. So for example, frenzy charges, endurance charges, power charges, they do have ways to generate charges that don't relate to the skills that generate them, and it opens up some really interesting opportunities for late game. So I would like to see them explore a little bit more on the front of being able to generate your own corpses, or be able to, you know, have corpse generation. Obviously, if you run with like the corpse confidence, whatever the gem is called, that allows you to not consume a corpse, and then you have like, you know, 5%, 5%, 15%, so you got like another 45% chance to not consume a corpse. And plus some of the uniques, you get to the point where you might be able to infinitely generate off corpses if you can make your own. So I get their trepidation, but I think it would be cool to be able to use that stuff as part of your generation in your build if you are focusing on more corpses rather than not. Next, let's talk about the location on the passive skill tree, and of course the Ascendancies as well. I would say that as far as like the availability of options for the Sorceress and the Witch on the skill tree here, for the Witch especially, is pretty good. It's probably better than most in general. There are definitely some challenges with some of the other classes. Like I would argue that Warrior doesn't have enough mana recovery. Like they really only have nodes where they can convert mana cost into life costs, but it's not like a perfect conversion either. They don't really have a whole lot of options for that. It's like they're kind of pigeonholed in what they choose in the area of the tree. There's also some things that are very necessary for like mercenary that are really far away. So like reload time for the crossbow is super important, but it's kind of far away from the starting point compared to those. Monk definitely has some great options because they're a hybrid character. They can dip into Ranger, or they can dip into like Ranger Huntress or Sorceress Witch. And I think that Witch Sorceress is in a good spot as well. And hopefully, once we get Flail and Primal Magic, we'll be able to combine some things together as well. You have some good defensive options here. You have Minion Life. I love the fact that in the beginning, you have spell damage and minion damage on these nodes all the way up, which gives you a lot of freedom in being able to play both of those simultaneously. You have cast speed initially, which is super important, though most characters and classes do have attack speed or cast speed early on, which is useful for some builds that need to get online. You have a choice node here for physical, spell damage, minions, or chaos, some survivability aspects and all that. I would say that their side tree, as far as like deciding to come out of this diamond, it sometimes feels like it's a little too expensive. Like in some of these other classes, you can dip out in a few points if you wanted to take the attribute highway and stack early on and move to a different area, and you can get right into other options. But it does feel like the Witch Sorceress side of the tree, you have to pay quite a lot of points to get somewhere that isn't your starting area if you wanted to skip over this. So you're kind of incentivized to spend your first 10 to 20 points in this diamond without having to be able to spread out to different spots or try different things. So I think that's something that could be improved, but in general, I would say that the Witch is in general more well off than most as far as the availability of their locale on the skill tree. Next up is the two Ascendancies for the Witch, and they have a very interesting set of two Ascendancies that have some really unique aspects to them, some very big pros and some very big cons that go along with them, which makes building for Witch, I think, kind of interesting across the board. First, we can talk about Blood Mage, since I'm on my Blood Mage right now. There is one thing about the Blood Mage that is different than any other Ascendancy in the entire game, and I am always someone who appreciates variety and taking risks, and I'm not sure if this is something that is worth the final result, but they are the only Ascendancy out of the 12 Ascendancies in early access right now that doesn't get a choice for their first 2 ascendancy points. So your first ascendancy, you do not get to choose. You have to choose these 2 nodes, which means your first ascendancy is just a -2. You get a benefit for it, but there's no freedom in selection that every other of the 11 ascendancies get. So you have to get increased maximum life, and you have to get the life remnants, which is the core functionality of the Blood Mage. Now, it is different and it is interesting, right? So you have you know that every Blood Mage is going to convert base mana cost and also suffer that in life cost. They have that attrition as part of their kit, and there's ways for them to play around with that to get like stagger mechanics, like Brewmaster effects, life leech, and things like that to help balance it out. But it is something different, and I'm curious how people feel about this here. It kind of shocked me at first, and I was like, why is it that they're the only ascendancy in the game that doesn't get a choice for their first ascendancy? They have to go this road, and then they only have 3 more ascendancies to choose on where they go after that, whereas everyone else gets to do like full big roads on different areas and different pathways and that sort of thing. So it's kind of an interesting choice. Obviously, it's part of the core kit, and I think there are some good choices in here. I do like having the extra physical damage here. The life leech is massive, though you kind of need to get it in many cases, just because you are paying the base life cost overall. The effective curses and infinite curse duration is awesome. I have tried to use this many times, but I also find that the infinite curse duration is kind of like a give and take. I like the concept of it, and I've tried to run this in many builds, and maybe this becomes better later on in the game. But again, because we've already -2 on our ascendancy points, losing another 2 for infinite curse duration when most fights don't last long enough for you to be able to get a benefit from this might save you from having to recast things. But depending on what curses you're talking about, like if you're talking about like you can do the sorceress curses as well, like flammability, hypothermia, conductivity. These can be really nice in single target long extended boss fights, like uber pinnacle bosses that take a while. You can get some really nice value out of things like despair if you're doing a chaos build and stuff like that. But conceptually, I was really attached to the idea of infinite duration on curses, but also I just couldn't justify this expenditure when I was making builds from it in general. And also just let me know how you feel about that in general. I love this left side of the tree. Crit chance with crit damage that scales per life. Super fun. The base crit is something that I haven't theory crafted too much, but I'm hoping this has ended up being a net positive. A lot of the bone skills have base 15% anyways, so I don't know if this would just work for other spells, like if you're doing an elemental blood mage or something like that. And then obviously you have the stagger mechanic, which is really nice. There is also some very good defensive options like this Brewmaster stagger that you'll get in the Infernalist tree. But in general, I think everything about this tree is really cool. There's just a question of whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for long term. Like, should there be more ascendancies that get -2 points that they can't choose from? And also the infinite curses, is this really something that is actually super useful as an ascendancy choice, or could this just be, I don't know, a support gem or a notable or something versus the ascendancy itself, as most fights I feel like don't last long enough for you to be able to get full value out of this, or realistically a damage increase from this, but I could be wrong on that. Jumping over to my Infernalists, they are in a very similar situation, but they also have a lot more nodes, it feels like, to choose from. And I think they also have the very much the Kiss Curse style of game design that the Blood Mage has. There's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons in this, which does make for some very interesting gameplay. So for example, it's like the demon form, which unequips your weapon. So if you didn't know this about demon form, it is a form that you can take that gives you like a whole bunch of cast speed and damage and level of skills, but it also unequips your weapons, which is a problem because you lose the stats from the weapons. But you also can, if you're running minions and you have a scepter in your hand, you'll lose the spirit from it, which means it'll unsummon any minions that are relying on that spirit to exist. So this is very much like a spellcaster demon form. You can still run minions as long as you're not relying on your weapons for those stats, which is kind of a cool like plus minus on this. And I think there's plenty of really cool demon form builds that rely on it. And personally, I like this, like, you know, Veer's style avatar form that's very momentum based. You try to keep it active as long as you can and maintain it as long as you can to get some value. But I think that the inherent downside of losing your equipped weapons when you switch into it is something that, you know, maybe it should stay, maybe it shouldn't. I'm not really sure. You have the Infernal Flame here, which is kind of cool and interesting. I think this is super fun, and also means that even though you spend a lot of ascendancy points to get in here, having low and high triggers on your new mana cost is very unique. I love having this. I like things like the darkness mechanic for Chayula that makes the class super unique. And then you just have a whole bunch of ways to reserve life to get extra benefits, maximum life to trigger, a way to stagger damage and change damage types. Even just converting physical damage into chaos damage means that you don't need as much evasion or armor to avoid damage. Physical damage gets, turned into resistible damage. On that standpoint, the Infernal Hound is super cool. And then the crits are interesting as well if you want to do like a demon flame, demon form thing, while also taking damage from that. So I think Witch is probably on the better side of Ascendancies for choices. There's definitely some major negatives that might catch people off guard, but I'm curious to see what the third Ascendancy is going to be like and what that's going to look like for the Witch. And that's the Witch review. I want to kind of leave this here as this is a proposed solution to some of the issues that you have with like Witch minions in general. You can swap weapons, and based on the weapon you have up, it will swap the stats. So like if you have a scepter that's giving you specific minions, or is giving you a bunch of spirit that you then reserve for other things as well, those can definitely change up how you play the class. And there are solutions where you can, when your minions get low, you can toggle swap to resummon them. It doesn't solve every problem, and it certainly can have a lot of downsides to it, but it's a nifty little trick that you can use to kind of swap things around. And also there are some really awesome things that you can do with the Necromantic Talisman, which gives all of your equipped amulet stats to your minions instead of you, which is really cool. So play around with those and the weapon swaps, and you can make some really fun, unique experiences with the Witch overall. And I think the Witch is definitely in a good place in early access, aside from some minor things around minions that need to be fixed overall, and then just some general questions around philosophy that probably need to be answered in as we go into release. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.